Hey everyone, Boardgame Brody here with Meeple Mountain. I have a prototype copy of Phalanx Games' new game, Domination, a strategic wargame for 2 to 4 players that plays in 90 minutes. Players take command of Germany, the United Kingdom, Japan, and the Soviet Union during World War II. You'll be drafting and using operation cards the best way possible to help your team earn the most victory points at the end of the game, while also denying points to your opponents. You will be controlling territories, performing diplomacy, and researching the newest technologies. Let's first set up the game. Place the game board out on the table. The board is an abstract world map with the middle being the North Pole. Each area on the map is either a square, a circle, or an octagon. The square represents land where you'll be able to place your armies at and your air fleets. The circles represent islands where your fleets and your air fleets can be at, and the octagons are coastal areas where you can have any type of your units there. Each area has its own restrictions on stacking, meaning how many units you can have in each area, and who can control the area. If the space has 1 or 2 stars on it, then you will have a limit of 2 units in that space. Capitals are areas that have 3 stars, and they have a limit of 4 units in that space. And only units controlled by 1 player can be in a particular space at a time. Now, any of your home areas without enemy units are always controlled by you. If your home area ends up with 1 or more enemy unit on it, then it's controlled by the opponent. Capitals are a little bit different, where if the enemy has 1 unit, it's uncontrolled by anyone, and you will lose 3 points. And if they have 2 units or more on it, then they will control it and they will gain the 3 points. Also, if the capital has at least 1 enemy on it, you will not be able to build any of your units on there. And all of this leads me to explain to you how you win the game. Each space on the board has a certain number of stars. Each star in an area is worth 1 point. So 3-star capitals are worth 3 points, where a 1-star area is worth 1 point. Players will be gaining and losing points immediately when the control of an area is changed. Besides control points, you can gain points from diplomacy event cards or from developing technology. After each round, you will check the win condition for the Allies and for the Axis. In the first round, 1939, each faction must reach 32 points to win, but as the game progresses, the threshold for each side will change, with the number increasing for the Allies and decrease for the Axis. Now to get back to setup, each player will choose a different power to play as, and each player will sit down on the side of the board that matches the power they have chosen. Germany is here, the UK is here, Japan over there, and the USSR over there. Each player will take a technology board, and you will take 4 brown, 3 yellow, 3 blue, 3 red, and 2 purple cubes and place them on the diamond-shaped areas on the board matching its color. You will in addition place 1 white cube on the 0 on the bottom of the right of the board. During the game, players will have the chance of playing cards that have a certain technology icon on it. There is a specific point during a round where you will be able to flip this card up and it will become activated for the rest of the game. You will then move the cube of that technology shown on the card that you played. This could give you some passive abilities. Army Tech is brown, and when developed you will increase the efficiency of your land units. Navy Tech is blue, it increases the efficiency of your sea units. Logistic Tech increases the efficiency to build units, and it can partially prevent rocket attacks. Intelligence Tech lets you manipulate cards during the strategic phase, and they are also used to develop the higher level of Rocket Tech. This rocketry technology can force an opponent to discard cards from their hand. Players take all the units assigned to them and place them next to their technology board. I will mostly be explaining a 4-player game, but know that when playing a 2 or 3-player game, some players might be controlling more than just one major power, and when doing this, you will need to make sure that you keep track of the technologies for each of these powers separately. Place the round marker here. It will move to the right each round. Also, it states how many cards players draw each round, and who starts each round. Take the 2 Allies join war markers, and those are placed here on the board and here. Eventually, the US and China will be able to join the war, and as their markers move, that side will get to use one of their cards for the next round. The neutral units, the resistance tokens, and the damage markers are all placed to the side near the board. The 4 victory point markers are placed on the track with each one starting on a different number, which will correspond to each power's starting positions. Players will place a specific number of units in certain areas on the board. The board will also show these units on their spaces. Once you're experienced playing the game, there is also an alternative way to start the game with different unit placements. Take the 4 US cards and you will shuffle them and place them on the board in this position here. You'll do the same thing with the 2 China cards. The remaining cards are shuffled and form a draw deck and placed on this spot here on the board. The last step for setup is to place the France and the Italy tiles near the board. The game setup should look something like this. In the game there are 2 factions. The UK and USSR are the Allies versus Germany and Japan as the Axis. Those 4 countries are the 4 major powers in the game. The US and China start the game as inactive powers and can join the game becoming allied powers. France and Italy are coalition partners. At the beginning of the game, France is under control of the UK and Italy is with the Germany player. This can change several times during the game, but each power will use a specific color for its home areas, for its event cards, and for its units. Now let's talk about playing the game. Each round represents a year and is divided into 3 phases. First, the strategic phase, then the action phase, then the administrative phase. In the strategic phase, players will draw the number of cards listed on the year tracker. As you can see, this will be 4, 5, or 6 cards as the game progresses. In 1939, Germany will get an additional card, and in the first round will draft 2 cards instead of 1. The same with Japan in 1941. So everyone will draw the amount of cards, and players will draft cards. So everyone will pick 1 card in their hand to keep. If starting with 4, now there will be 3. You'll pass those 3 to the player to your left, and you will receive 3 cards from the player to your right. Take one of those 3 cards and keep it and pass the remaining to your left. You will do this until you have the amount of cards that you started with, which is 4 in the first round. Of course, unless you are Germany, and they will take 2 cards from their beginning hand and then 1 thereafter, ending with 5. After the draft, each player in player order can decide to discard one of their cards and draw a new card off the top of the deck. Also, if a player develops Enigma technology during the game, they will be able to draw 2 cards and choose one of those cards to keep. The last thing in the strategic phase is, in player order, players can decide to use spy technology, which lets you look at 3 random cards from another player and choose to discard one of them if you would like. If you do discard one of their cards, then they will take the top card from the deck to refill their hand back to the same number of cards. It will then be the action phase, and players will take turns playing 1 card for inaction. These cards are multi-use cards so that you can use cards for several different types of actions. The top left lists the operation points that you can use. These points will be from 3 to 6, and you will use these to build units, move units, attack units, or launch rockets. When using the card for their operation points, if you don't want to use all the points, you can preserve 1 point by rotating the card that you played 90 degrees. Only 1 card can be saved in this manner in a round. This extra point can be combined with another card used later in the round, and then it's discarded. If you don't use this card at the end of the action phase, then it will automatically be discarded. To deploy a unit, you will take a look at your technology board to see how many points each unit costs to build. You will take a unit from your pool, and you'll place it on your same color home deploying area within stack limit, and it can't have any damage markers or enemy units on it. The unit type will also need to match the building icon on that area. Factories for your armies and your planes, and the shipyards for your boats. The logistic technology will increase your efficiency to build these units. To attack, you will need to spend the indicated number of operation points noted on your tech board to remove one unit. This unit has to be adjacent to one of your in-supply units, meaning that you can trace a path consisting of any number of adjacent areas under you or your allied power control from the unit to one of your home areas. With Army or Navy technology, you can increase the efficiency of attacking your enemy. Air fleets can only be attacked if they are the last unit in the area. But when you attack a unit, it doesn't matter what kind of unit it is. You will always spend that amount of operation points for attacking with the unit that you're attacking with. To move, again, you'll visit your technology board to see what the movement costs are. The unit will need to be in supply, and it can be moved to any number of adjacent controlled areas, to any in-supply area, or to an unoccupied area adjacent to an in-supply area. I know that sounds confusing, but really you can move one of your units to any of your controlled areas, or any adjacent areas that are unoccupied. But if there is an enemy unit there, you will need to attack them before you can move there. The blue arrows indicate that the first type of unit to move through it needs to be a Navy unit, and for the brown arrows, the first unit to move through it needs to be an Army unit. But units are able to move through either land or sea links to an in-supply controlled area as long as they respect the stacking rules. And units can pass through any type of in-supply areas on their way to their final destinations. So the arrows are more important when you're first moving to that area. You will always be able to move through areas containing your coalition partner units, and you can move through any additional power units only if they are at war. But if they are not at war yet, like the US or China, then you can't move through them. If an enemy-controlled area contains only airplanes, then you can move your armies or your boats into the area, causing immediate destruction of their airplanes. Whenever a unit takes over an opponent's home area that's capable of building units, place a damage marker in that area to indicate that they are unable to build any units this year in that area. Again, when you're attacking a capital, you will need 2 units to be on it, and then you can place a damage token there. This marker will stay until the administrative phase. Army and Navy technology can also increase efficiency moving those units. If you have developed rocketry technology, then you can launch. Each power can only launch 1 rocket per round, and it can be any type that you have developed. To launch a rocket, you will discard a card with a certain number of operation points, and depending on the type of rocket, the opponent will need to discard a certain number of cards randomly. But players can also develop radar technology, and this decreases the number of cards that need to be discarded by rockets. Lastly, you can use your operation points for an airstrike. Your airstrike needs to be in supply and in range up to 2 spaces from an opponent's unit. Each power can only use 1 airstrike for each airplane it has during a round. You will discard the number of operation points equal to the number of operation points required to destroy the chosen units of your opponent, and you won't be able to preserve or use extra remaining points on this card. Now, besides the operation points, the top right has a technology icon that can be used to increase in your technology. To upgrade your technology, you will place this card face down, and at a certain point, you'll be able to move in that type of technology on your player board. Now, the bottom of the card lists an event, and it might have 1 or more event icon. And this part also has a color associated with it. And you can only use the event part of the card if it is your power's color. So if this card is not your color, then you can still use it for its operation points or its technology icon, just not for its event. Tactic events can modify operation points on the remaining cards left in your hand, while logistic events can cause players to deploy or move units. Diplomacy cards feature a nation's flag and a number of victory points, and you will place this card next to your technology board and score the number of points shown. This card will stay out until the end of the game, or until another player plays a diplomacy card with the same country on it. Depending on which card has more victory points, players will possibly discard these cards, losing the points associated with them. Again, you will need to pass the threshold of victory points during the current year to win the game. Also during this phase, the UK and the USSR can discard one card to perform a land lease action. By discarding a card, the UK player will move the US marker one box to the right on its track and draws a card from its deck. They can look at it, but it will be placed to the side, and the UK player will receive this card during the next card draft. And it will be in addition to the other cards that they draft. This action can only be done once per round. The USSR player can do the same action, but will instead be using the China marker and its cards. Once the marker is to the last spot, you won't be able to perform this action any longer. Once you have no more cards in your hand, or if you decide you want to keep a card for later, you can pass on your turn. But you can only keep one card for the next round. You'll place it to the side and it will be later added to your hand of cards after the next draft. If you pass with more than one card, then you will then keep one and discard the others. If you are the UK or the USSR player and you performed a land lease action, then you already have one card being held for the next round, and you won't be able to keep an additional one. And once you pass, you will not be able to perform any more actions this round. After all players have passed, you will then proceed to the administrative phase. During this phase, you will check the win condition by looking at the victory point track and seeing if any side has passed their threshold. If it is passed by any faction, then the game ends, but if not, then you will keep on playing. Now, let me talk a little bit more about France and Italy. They are coalition powers and they can switch factions. The UK starts with the control of France and can build the French army and fleet, and only those and only there in France. If an Axis player controls France during this phase of the game, then France becomes a collaborator to the Axis player that controls it. All French units are removed from the board and placed in the supply of the new player who now controls them. And now the Axis player can build French units in France and treat them as its own. If the UK player takes France back, then during that part of the administrative phase again, you will switch out control the same way. This is also the same way for Italy, as they are a coalition power of Germany. If an allied player controlled it, then the same switch would happen. To indicate these changes, you will add the tiles on the board showing control, because both allied and Axis players can control both of these areas. Continuing with the phase, you will then remove damage tokens from the home areas under your control. Powers can then use their airplanes for strategic bombings, and then countries will refresh their airplanes and the rocket technologies. You will then turn all the technology cards developed face up and announce what technology that you possess, adjusting the victory point markers immediately for adding new types of technology. You will then advance the round marker to the next year and start a new round by drafting cards, then playing cards, and then checking for the win condition. Remember, all victory points are based on the current game state. When losing a country or discarding a card, then the points will change right then and there. Again, you will need to pass the threshold of victory points during the current year to win the game. My explanation of the game will give you a good overview of the game, but there are some areas in the game which you can learn later, like the U-boats, the resistance units, the puppets, airstrikes, bombardment, and even alternative setups for the game. Now, this game is great because it brings a card-based war game which can be played with up to 4 players to the table that can be played in an hour and a half. And it's a sandbox style game, so you have the flexibility of how you want to win the game. You can dominate through controlling the most land or areas on the board. You can go heavy in the technology part of the game, which might let others dominate on the board, but you can get a late game push from all your discounts that you unlock through your technology board, and you can take back over the board a lot quicker. You can specialize in event cards and try to be diplomatic, adding these small points up until they give you just enough points to pass your threshold. Depending on your major power that you are playing, you can try to bring the US or China into the war sooner, taking advantage of their cards. Also, all the major powers are all asymmetrical, as they can't do the exact same things. They all start differently on the board. Germany will be able to use U-boats where others can't, and the Allied players have resistance units. The UK starts with France under their control, and Germany starts with Italy under theirs. So you might be thinking, are all of these major powers balanced? And I can't quite answer that question yet, but I think time will tell. But if you don't know, there was another version similar to this one that was published, and so I think the game has been tested there, and this version should have some of the fixes that the other version might have missed. Now, I've never played the other version, so I can't tell you about any of the differences, but I do know that they made enough changes to this version that it is similar, but this version, I believe, adds the technology board along with some other changes. I very much like the card drafting in the game. I feel like that opens up the game for everyone, so everyone can benefit by getting what they might think are better cards for themselves instead of getting stuck with whatever they draw. Players will also be able to take advantage of the events more, as they can play those if they match their colors. Next, the multi-use cards give even more choices and variety. The operation points in itself let you do so many different actions on the board. You can move, attack, or deploy new units on the board. Also, you have the technology part, and also those events. So you'll be juggling your cards around as you know which ones you can't use for the event, and you can only use one technology card per round, so you will at times be forced to use a card for its operational points, but again, you can do many actions with those points. Most likely in the game, you'll be taking advantage of all of these different actions and drafting and using the best cards that you can. This is how the game is a sandbox game, because you can do any of these things. You can focus more on anything you'd like to dominate the game with. The game board is also asymmetric, with different colored arrows going different directions, making each player's tactics different. One team might need to use boats to move to another location on the board, where the bordering power might need to use army units to move the other way. And of course, since this is a war game, you will need to develop your tactics, your planning, and take advantage of opportunities to win the game. So make sure that you use the Enigma device, spy on the other powers, perform airstrikes, or even drop a nuclear bomb, all in 90 minutes in Domination by Phalanx Games. Again, this is Boardgame Brody. I hope you enjoyed this video. Stick around and check out some other board game reviews to see what you might want to get to the table.